What's up, everyone? Welcome to Bill Bronze and Dragons. I'm your host, Bill Bron Bafflestone. So today we're having another episode of my deep dive series. Today looking at the perceived disparity between marshals and casters. And the reason I want to talk about this is that with One D&D having come out, the first UA, people have been issuing to me the sentiment that the disparity is growing because of the crit changes. And I have to say, it made me reply, there's a disparity? I'm not so sure about that, because I've had a few recent instances that have actually made me admire marshals quite a bit. And I would like to present the argument that maybe they're not unbalanced relative to casters. I play in West March, and in West Marches sometimes you have replayable missions. And so, just as a coincidence, my last two missions on a particular server was the same mission. And wow, we performed way differently. The first time we went through was something of a struggle, and the second time we went through, we blew the doors off of it, just crushing everything in our path. And the difference was that in the second encounter, we had marshals. We had really good ones, and they were just blowing the crap out of everything, and it made things a lot easier. And I remember also in a recent level 20 one-shot that I did, which I've broken down a couple of battles from and plan to do the rest one of these days, I was playing an uber-optimized level 20 wizard, and it was very effective. It was a lot of fun to play. But was he overshadowing the marshals? Not really. Those dudes were throwing down epic damage sequences. And, I had moments of struggle as a control caster. And that's actually kind of a running theme that I see. As a caster, I'm often kind of hanging in the back, managing the battle, conducting tactical analysis, and gauging how my team is performing and where I need to step in to make things easier, constantly trying to conserve resources and not blow them on hero moments. And what do I do most of the time? I end up watching the marshals get all the hero moments. I throw down epic damage sequences left and right, and whooping and hollering with joy in the process. A lot of them love keeping track of their damage output. It was like, I did like 300 damage in that battle, and I'm like, wow, cool, I did like 40. And of course, I'm a caster. I'm contributing with managing the battle and controlling and saving people and doing that caster thing. But I honestly have a hard time accepting the argument that casters are significantly better than marshals, even at high tiers of play, because as I said, I did a level 21 shot. I actually think it's probably going to increase towards marshals, or at least One D&D, at least with this UA so far. I think marshals are going to make out a little better, right? The crit changes, nerf some of their stuff, but the inspiration changes really help them out. Like, they make way more D20 rolls than casters do, so they're going to be getting inspiration all the time. And, probably flipping it to us casters who aren't making nearly as many rolls. So, a controversial topic, I know, but as usual, I'm going to present my arguments and present my grounds, and you can let me know what you think. By the way, I should mention, you may have noticed, the music has changed. I live in New York, and a good friend of mine is a badass saxophonist, so he's agreed to let me use his music in these videos. So if you like it, his information will be in the video description below. And I, of course, want to thank my Patreon team. I love these guys. They're always so helpful in creating these videos, creating topics for talking to me about D&D and improving my knowledge of D&D. So love you guys. Thanks so much. Really appreciate you. With all that said, and while we're at it, please like and subscribe. Help a brother out. And without any further ado, let's jump into this, and I will present my arguments as to why I think the disparity between casters and marshals is not really as significant as people think. So first of all, combat is by far the most important of the three pillars, right? Between combat, interaction, and exploration, combat is the biggest one, right? And combat is where marshals tend to shine. A lot of the arguments are that, they're not that great in other phases of the game. Well, okay, so what? Combat is by far the most important of the three pillars. Now, interactions are the next most important, And I wouldn't necessarily say that casters are that much better than marshals in interactions. I mean, spells can sometimes help with interactions. A lot of times they're often risky. People see you casting a spell and combat starts. Or even if you have subtle spells, certain things like Charm Person will let them know what you've been doing. There can be bystanders that are able to see what's going on and realize that their friend has had a complete about face or what have you. And so I'm open to arguments against this position. It's just that I personally have done plenty of all role-playing missions, and I didn't necessarily feel like casters were any better. A lot depends on the caster's loadout. They only have a certain number of spells known or prepped, so they would have to have the right ones, which isn't always the case. And a lot of this stuff is through the role-playing of the player, which marshals are perfectly capable of doing just as well as casters are. So I've never felt that casters really overshadowed marshals in the interaction phase. And the exploration phase is the least important. So even if there's an advantage, it's marginal because it's such a small part of the game. And while I get arguments that casters are probably a tad better on average, because they have familiars and flight and things like that, Rangers and Rogues are pretty good at the exploration phase. Admittedly, Fighters and Barbarians aren't the best, but I don't think that any advantage that casters have is that significant, and I don't think it takes place in a phase of the game that is very significant. So let's talk about combat. In combat, marshals are the game's best and most consistent source of damage. They are considerably better at single target damage output than casters are, which is arguably the single most important aspect of combat in this game. As I said, I play in a lot of Westmarch games, and in the games that lack marshals because party construction has not been perfectly well thought out, damage output is a real problem. Now, I do play casters. I do think that controls are arguably more impactful, but you still need damage output to finish enemies, and when I'm in teams that are largely casters and lack marshals, it's a difficult time. It's actually really hard to put some of these things down, and then they're hanging around for 5 or 6 rounds, using their abilities against you during that time, and it gets difficult. Plus, I have honestly come to appreciate the Nova damage of optimized marshals. They can really swing important battles. If you have one and he blows up on an enemy for half their health, like a BBEG, or wipes out like 2 or 3 minions in one turn, that's amazing. That has a massive impact on the battle. So in combat, I think marshals are probably better than casters because I've seen teams of marshals mow down encounters where I, as a caster, literally didn't have to do anything. Because remember, I'm managing the battle and I'm like, oh my god, my guys are rolling through these dudes. I really don't need to expend any resources here, do I? So cantrip, 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 and they're crushing it. I didn't even need to be there a lot of the time. Now, yes, I get it. I'm a caster. Spells are admittedly versatile. They impact all 3 pillars of play, and they definitely offer superior control options to marshals. However, as I said, spells are not great at creating damage relative to optimized marshals. It is really hard to get significant damage output with a spell unless it's an AoE and you have convenient grouping, and that's not so easy. These spells have small AoEs, pretty much. The DMs that I play with know how to space their monsters out so that you really can't get that many in an AoE, and a lot of the times there are friendly fire issues. So when we're talking about damage output versus a single enemy, wow, it is so bad, and at higher cost. For example, Psychic Lance averages only 20 damage for a 4th level slot. Like, that's a bad hit for a lot of marshals who are doing damage for no resources at all. And quite frankly, I know Psychic Lance and Mind Whip and Disintegrate are really popular. I cringe every time I see a caster throw one of those out. I'm like, oh, that slot could have done so much instead of just replicating 2/3 of a marshal's round. Now, furthermore, 5th edition is full of save or suck a little spells. There are like almost no save or die options. And so you really need a resource-free damage output from marshals to finish enemies in most cases, at least in my experience. Furthermore, casters have severely limited endurance. They have limited spell slots, which typically recharge on a long rest. Obviously, warlocks are the exception, but they don't have very many slots in the first place. And especially against enemy casters, where Counterspell just drains your slots so quickly. I honestly hate casting Counterspell most of the time. I always praise the heavens when it actually has an impact, because enemies will use all of their resources against PCs, where casters have to manage their resources. So if casters are sucking out all of my spell slots with me counterspelling all the time, I don't think that's a great play. I'm not here to fall into the trap of a DM making me waste all of my resources in early battle so that I got no juice left for the final battle. I tend to try and have a lot of gun left at the end. But the point is, using slots for damage is suboptimal when marshals generate it for free. I am really not a fan of damage spells in 5th edition. Now, a lot of this is actually on the DM. Tables with more battles emphasize this weakness, and casters can struggle if they have a lot of battles and few resources, and especially if marshals get their short rests. So they're getting their action surges and their key points and all that stuff back, and casters are just using hit dice. So honestly, much of this perceived disparity, I think, is on the DM and how they schedule their encounters. And do they give their casters a bunch of long rests? Well, then yeah, maybe they will outshine the marshals. But in a longer campaign where there's not as many short rests and more short rests, then marshals will shine more. Furthermore, the higher we get in levels, it's way harder to run a caster. They are continually confounded by the prevalence of BBEGs having strong saves, magic resistance, and strong defenses. I mean, most resistances and immunities in the game have no impact on marshals. They are intended to defend against spellcasters. And, just as an example, in my level 20 battle, our final battle, I literally threw the BBEG into a prismatic wall 3 times in one round with telekinesis. It did nothing, like literally nothing. It was a waste of an action for me, or a waste of a turn. Plus, in modern 5th edition, monsters have been tweaked so that they have spell-like abilities that cannot be counterspelled. That's not good for casters. And let's face it, DMs know the killer spells, and they often plot to circumvent them. They don't want casters to trivialize their battles, and so they set things up so that they don't. Furthermore, casters are confounded by the prevalence of legendary resistances. So many BBEGs have those in Tier 3 and above, and they suck. It really makes it hard to be effective as a save or suck caster when the enemy has legendary resistance, and it's hard to pilot a caster. The optimal deployment of spells requires deductive abilities to choose the save type, to choose the damage type, to estimate their weaknesses and strengths, and to gauge the percentage chance that they have blind sight, or all those things. In a game where literally most people can't even figure out the optimal place to stand. Point being, casting optimally is super difficult. There are tons of errors that you can make, and so I would say marshals are probably better for that. They are way more consistent and way easier to pilot. Let's also not forget that marshals do get a lot of spell-like abilities from their class and subclass to supplement their damage output, and marshals can and do supplement their builds with magic items. Right, magic items are typically ignored by us theorizing optimizers because the availability of items is so different from table to table, but it cracks me up because the assumption we make is that there are no items, and that is clearly wrong. There are items, and marshals have access to good items that can build loadouts that specialize in interactions if they want, or in exploration if they want. They can add those uncommon glamour weaves, and brooms of flying, and summoning items, and things like that. I mean, man, let's face it, an optimized marshal with a great item loadout, that is crazy good, right? It's crazy good. So that's it. That is my take on casters versus marshals and the perceived disparity. I don't see a disparity, personally. I see differences in play where casters are a bit more versatile and they have a bit more impact across a wider variety of scenarios, but where marshals are better in the single most important aspect of the game, combat. So let me know what you think in the comments below. Am I right? Am I wrong? Do casters actually enjoy a heavy disparity versus marshals? Or am I right where it's pretty much the same? Let me know. And regardless, thank you so much for watching. This has been Build Bronze and Dragons. I'm your host, Bill Brown Bafflestone. See you next time.